Yeah, and okay, so Chris, I wanted to jump back to you because you said something, earlier as you were describing your experience with, going from AA to more of like a fit recovery type approach. And you mentioned that you just felt better. And so I was curious if you could describe like what was happening for you, when you were in AA, and as you transitioned over to more of like a health and fitness and wellness type recovery path. Because as you and I both know, one of the biggest challenges people have with alcohol use disorder is the craving issue, and that oftentimes leads to relapse. So what happened for you on your path as you started to feel better, and kind of what were your first steps and what were you doing?
Sure. So I was doing a lot of stumbling and bumbling in the beginning. I knew that I wanted to get back into shape as soon as I was done with my benzodiazepine script and detox. And I was in inpatient rehab for 2 months. I had a lot of brain fog then, so I don't even remember. Maybe it was 6 weeks, but it was a significant period of time. And luckily, we were kind of bused to a local gym that was right next to a GNC. Every other day, maybe. Foggy memory, I can't recall. But I had some workout partners who were also in the same program. And all I knew was that I wanted eventually for my physique to be a symbol of my victory over alcohol, which is not terminology that would be welcomed in at least the AA circles that I was familiar with at the time. Ego is a huge problem. And I was always thinking, like, what if I could harness my ego and use it to help me win? And then I can, explore what else the universe has to offer. And that's kind of what happened. I had a somewhat egotistical approach and maybe resentful in the beginning towards alcohol, not towards people. And I think that's a crucial distinction. I was mad at alcohol, the substance. I was mad at what it had done to my brain. And for me, the best outlet for my anger and negativity was the gym. And I would find that I could leave my negativity and anger in the gym. I think it should be said that there are different flavors or types of AA meetings, different vibes. The ones that I found myself in are perhaps not representative of the majority or of a lot of people I've talked to who enjoyed AA. The meetings I went to were very dank and dark and depressing. And I could not relate after a period of time, after I started to feel a little physically better. I found myself no longer feeling inspired by the people who were there, which again sounds arrogant, and I'm sure I'd be accused of that. But these were particularly depressing meetings. It's hard for me to overemphasize that. And so actually it turned out that at a certain point, the AA meetings made me want to drink, and my workouts made me want to conquer, the world. And so that became something that I focused on more on health and fitness. And I found that my cravings would go down, especially as I added supplements, but I didn't understand why. And so I stumbled upon a book called 7 Weeks to Sobriety by the late Joan Matthews Larson, who is one of the pioneers of nutrient repair or biochemical repair, biochemical restoration. There's a number of terms for it, but it's essentially just the targeted use of nutrition and supplements, so diet and supplementation, but especially supplementation, in order to help rebalance your biochemistry, to undo some of the damage that the drug has done. And it's used mostly for alcohol because alcohol is a particularly deleterious drug. And at the same time, it can be used for opioids or cocaine, et cetera, other drugs. But alcohol is a really bad one. It's potentially the most toxic drug that we have in some ways, and just causes a cascade of imbalances in the body. So it stood to reason for me that these compounds that we evolved with for millions of years might be useful in healing myself physically from alcohol addiction. And I thought, well, then if I can rebalance myself physiologically, then maybe it will be easier for me to stop being so egotistical. Maybe I can become enlightened. Maybe I can focus on other things. Maybe I can improve my relationships and meditate. And that's actually what ended up happening. So I'm not saying I'm fully enlightened. I'm not. I can't levitate. I can't meditate for 3 hours and have visions. Maybe I will someday, but I'm a lot wiser than I was at the time. Each year that I left alcohol in the past by one more year, I became a bit more balanced and more stable. And I found things happening. I think in AA, they talk about the miracles or the promises. of sobriety, that's another term I don't really use, because I don't like to think about the absence of alcohol or define my life in those terms. I like to think about what am I present with, and so if I definitely was at one time an active alcoholic, but now I'm a dog owning, mixed martial arts practicing, yoga doing, pretty healthy diet having entrepreneur who likes to do podcasts and try to help people out. And I'd rather define myself that way than by some inanimate substance, which I no longer believe has any power over me whatsoever. So with all of that said, it was a slow process and an incremental one. And I don't mean to imply that it's going to be the same for everyone, but I hope that by telling my story and by sharing some of the things that I have found that may be universal, such as just a blanket need for some kind of biochemical rebalancing, that people will actually find what they need and hopefully start their own adventure.
Chris, that's neat. Chris, I want to ask you about your experience with exercise. Were you having a group with you when you did the exercise? Was it by yourself or were you with other folks? And did that sort of constitute an AA support group?
It did. So that's a great point. And what ended up happening was I went against the advice of the rehab counselor to not go to sober living. I didn't want to go there because I had a hunch about what goes on there. And there's a lot of drug use and alcohol use at sober living facilities. And also I've always been kind of a homebody. So I was like, I've done my thing here at rehab. I'm going to go home. I'm going to rearrange my furniture, make it unrecognizable, have a fresh start. What ended up happening was I had to move out of that posh, fancy apartment that I had in my finance days because I had to become a personal trainer. I ended up moving in with a couple guys who still worked in finance, who were acquaintances, who were actually social drinkers, but very light by my standards at the time. And we ended up having one of the best years of all of our lives, where they would come back from work at like 9 or 10 at night, which if you work in finance, it's a pretty good time to get home. We would go to the gym, and it was like a cheap 24-hour fitness place around the corner. We'd go there, a lot of camaraderie, a lot of lifting, a lot of joking around and laughing, come back, have like a late 11 p.m. dinner. And then, the next day they'd be at work. I'd be trying to figure my life out and studying for the personal trainer test or doing whatever I was doing, reading books. And then we do it all over again each night. So it did become a support group for me. I think I was with them for a year and a half. And then, at some point I moved to Savannah. I was in Atlanta at the time, but we're still actually saw them. I went to Atlanta last weekend and hung out with all of them. And it's, lifelong friends. And they actually respected the journey that I was on because I was open with them. I had heart to hearts with them. And they thought it was cool that I wasn't trying to hide it, that I was, it is what it is, was kind of my attitude. And here I am, and here's what I do. And I think a lot of people who have a sense of shame or who struggle with the stigma of addiction could benefit by having confidants or just a couple close people. In my experience, it's always been better to have, a couple really close friends or confidants or a support group than a huge number of peripheral friends, which is something I had during my finance years. I knew a lot of people, but I would not have wanted to be on a desert island alone with them. So that's kind of my litmus test, the desert island test. And they passed that. And in my experience, people who pass that test often end up being lifelong friends.
Chris, what you've experienced is great. That is what Dr. Sinclair would call rewiring your brain. See, what you've done is these are like what we call in the Sinclair method, alcohol-free days. And you fill those days with things that induce endorphins. So as you all are aware, there are these endorphins, these natural opiate chemicals in the brain that are released by alcohol, but are also released when we do strenuous activity like working out, particularly with other humans, other people. And so your experience describes exactly what we would hope everyone would do who's struggling with alcohol. That is to get another source of endorphins that's really healthy. And that's exactly what you did with your friends, joking around, laughing around the table, eating a nice meal, which induces endorphins, but particularly with people. So you've got this wonderful source of pleasure in your brain that makes neurons grow because you're eating healthy. and it makes them grow in the direction of healthy behaviors, like hanging around with your good friends and going to the gym and working out. And that's sort of where humans are designed for relationship. And without that, it's really hard to get the endorphins that someone needs to overcome the craving to drink. And that's one of the reasons physiologically or neurochemically why Alcoholics Anonymous works, is because you're with other people and you're having a nice time. But if you're not having a nice time, it doesn't work, right? And that was your experience, it sounds like.
I spent many nights, in years prior to that, drinking alone on my couch because I was too tired to try to set up plans. I had a long day at work and I figured I deserved this because I struggled through another hard day, not realizing that the day was hard in part because I woke up with withdrawal symptoms or at least a bad hangover. Yeah. So that amplifies, your sensations of negativity. But yeah, it crowded out, having those friends and working out with them crowded out the need for alcohol. And I think it also may have helped that I was working out with them and having feasts with them essentially at the same time of day that I was typically drinking the most. Now I was drinking almost all day by the time I quit, but it was always hitting it hard at night. And so for me, it was really helpful. I feel like there's some circadian or circadian rhythm going on that I haven't looked into research, but I know there's something there. And for me, it was correlated with sleep as well. I used to have sleep anxiety. And I would think, well, I need to drink, a bottle of red wine if I want to sleep tonight. Like, duh. And then, of course, I'm exhausted after this workout with these guys, and my endorphins are at least as high as they were, probably way higher than ever when I drank. So it crowded it out. And I think I was able to rewire my brain.